There's good stuff on the web. And our site is one of the many sites that has some of that good stuff. And so china.usc.edu and steer to the, I think it's called K-12, it may just be called K-12. There's a drop-down menu that allows you to take a look at all these things. One of the things that we started brand new in the last academic year were online courses. And the one that we're offering this fall, so I taught a couple of courses on China, and the one we're offering this fall is about basically South Korea today. And so you would be invited to sign up for that, and completing all the requirements and things like that, you are also eligible for continuing education units and that sort of thing. But just one of the many places, including the 1990 website, which you know well because you're here, tremendous resources. Take advantage of them. And you folks were all here, so you know what we did. You're ready for the test, right? Did you have your pens and paper and ready to go? Okay. In 500 words or less, what is America's policy towards China? And what should it be? I'll wait. Well, as you know, we spent time discussing that, talking about the recalibration. And I introduced these sources, and it was really gratifying to see, Devin was taking you through some of the possible uses, some of the ways of working with primary sources. And then at the end of the day, you heard from Frank Dichter that that's what he does with his university students, is just, let's look at these documents. What can we take from them? And these are, if you're teaching language arts, these are essays intended to persuade, and you can take a look at them. So once again, you have these two recent, published in July, things, China is not the enemy and Stay the Course. They argue for very different approaches. My own view is that neither is quite right. I signed the first, and so I am on record with the first, but I believe that it could have been better. And the main way it could have been improved is it could have been addressed not just to the government of the United States, but to the government of China. Because I think one of the things that you have to hold on to, and so this morning's vocabulary word is exceptionalism. Exceptionalism. And we hear that from time to time. We sometimes even apply it. That's an exceptional student. This is an exceptional project. It means it stands apart, right? And it could be exceptionally bad, but most of the time we use it for positive things. American exceptionalism, you hear this discussed by politicians and others. Well, I would argue that, like the United States, many people in China believe in Chinese exceptionalism. That these are distinct and different and special. And that's part of the issue in our relationship. We both think we're special. And unfortunately, we're not sufficiently plugged into the other to understand each other as well as we might. And so that's my main plea, is for you, with the stories you tell, with the skills that you help your students develop, that you will help to improve our shared future by deepening understanding. And as I said, I think that a letter of this sort ought to be addressed to both places, because the troubles in the relationship originate not with just one side. We're both in this. The solution is going to require both sides because the problem has been produced by both sides. Now, right now, neither side is recognizing that. You started it. And that's a problem. Getting past that requires some self-reflection. And I think both sides need that. And we talked about the Made in China 2025 program and how that has scared some in business and some in government, and looked at this heat map from that one particular study, which countries are at greater risk. And we talked about this. And we talked about the question of being a country seeking to move forward. And China is not unique in having an industrial policy, in investing in particular things. The United States does it. All the special programs for science education, math education, all of those things, language programs. You know, I was partly educated through these national grants. These kinds of things indicate national priorities. China's not unique. In fact, China, in many respects, is following an example pioneered by Japan, by South Korea, by Taiwan. And so it's important for us to understand that. At the same time, we know that the key issue is not competition, but that competition have boundaries and have rules. And that's one of the things that we've been talking about. And we looked at this chart, which spoke to openness. And I'd like to emphasize two things. China is not as open to foreign investment as many advanced countries. And China makes the argument that China is not yet an advanced country, that it's still developing, which is absolutely true. More people in China live a marginal life. I wouldn't say they live in poverty, but on the margin, than live in the United States. Let me say that one more time. There are about 330 million people living in the United States. There are about 330 million people in China who don't buy BMWs, who what? Can't necessarily travel because they what? They can't afford a day off. They can't afford to get sick. They can't afford those things, right? And so it's important for us to keep that in mind, that the government of China has to be mindful of trying to raise all boats. And that's a challenge as large, as diverse, and starting from a low base as China. But China has been changing. China has become more open. And in certain ways, China is far more open today than Japan or South Korea were at the same level of development. So I think it's appropriate for foreign countries to pressure China to become more open, but we have to acknowledge, too, that it's already come quite a distance, and that one reason we are so anxious about it is because no one's ever seen a China before. A China that is so large and has advanced so quickly. And so that's part of the anxiety on the external front. But China needs to change, but we also need to be mindful that it has changed in a positive way in some directions. This speaks to what I was talking about before. Okay, China, there are more Chinese, right? I mean, that's no mystery. But if Americans went to China at the same rate as we are in terms of our population ratio, how many Americans should be studying in China right now? If you figure China is at least 4 times larger than the United States, between 4 and 5 times, there should be how many Americans studying in China? 4 or 5 times this number. And even with that, it would still be what? About 1/4 as many Chinese. Okay? Chinese students, Chinese society, has been much more interested in the United States than we have been interested in China. Whose fault is that? I did my survey yesterday to find out about who had Huawei phones. I don't currently have one, but I have had a Huawei phone in the past. Terrific products. But Huawei has been in the gun sights for a long time. Okay, going back to the first decade of the 21st century when Cisco was accusing them of copyright violations, intellectual piracy, that sort of thing. And the Congress followed that in 2012 by saying Huawei and ZTE represented threats. No U.S. government entity ought to use their technology. Of course, things ramped up, and this slide is in the package that's available for you on the web. This thing ramped up last December, right? When Meng Wanzhou was arrested in Vancouver, where it turns out she has passports and a couple of homes and things like that. And she was arrested at the request of the United States government. And the accusation originally was bank fraud, that she had defrauded HSBC by telling HSBC, we are not transferring technology that we are not permitted to transfer. Essentially, American technology, which they purchase, they pay for, but is sold or licensed with the proviso that it not be transferred to countries on the no-go list, specifically Iran and North Korea. And it appears that Huawei worked around that, and that Ms. Meng was directly involved in that. And that's the charge. And so she's home on house arrest as the legal system grinds, and it could grind for a long, long time. So stay tuned on that. But in the meantime, these two Canadians who, as far as anybody apart from the Chinese government knows, are not guilty of any crime. Former diplomat and a business person, Korvig and Spavor. And they are not under house arrest. The circumstances of their detention are not known, but it appears as though they exist in solitary confinement with lights on all the time, and they're interrogated regularly. Korvig became a father while in jail. And in fact, when he was arrested, he was in Beijing to move from Beijing to Hong Kong. And his wife and child are in Hong Kong. So this is an issue. Some people call it hostage diplomacy. And the Chinese say that the U.S. started it and have been beating up on the Canadians because they're not happy with this U.S. action. The Canadians and the Americans say, no, Huawei broke the law. ZTE, another Chinese company, was also caught doing more or less the same thing twice. And so they were already under sanctions, and then they did it again, and they were given a death sentence by the US government. Xi Jinping appealed to Donald Trump, and Donald Trump said, well, we can't have those 70,000 employees in China out of work. And so he said, yeah, let it go, make it work. They paid a massive fine, and they had to change their leadership and have to have American investigators built into the company. But they will continue. I have no idea how Huawei plays it out, but it's a huge issue because Huawei is a major manufacturer of this advanced technology involved in making the next generation of cellular technology work. So a lot of attention on this. Now the question of cybersecurity. 9 out of 10 Americans identify this as a big issue between the United States and China. This is more than any other issue. And it's the only issue where the percentage of Americans who say it's a big problem has increased in the last 7 years. In all other issues, trade, job loss, other issues, fewer Americans are worried than in 2012. But on this, it's increased. Part of it is awareness. More companies are looking into this, and there are more reports and things like this. This was a point made by the chief American spy, the head of Cyber Command, the head of NSA. He argued that what? This was the biggest transfer of wealth in human history. And what he was referring to was not actually looting banks, but what? Technology, business practices. Coca-Cola, for example, what they were willing to pay for an acquisition in China, that information was gotten. It was taken. And so this was an issue. This was an issue. So this is a big issue, and peace was declared between the two governments. Presidents Xi and Obama said, okay, no more of this. We're going to still spy on each other all the time. But we're not going to go after economic information. And it seems that that deal is done. That moment has passed. And so there's been a lot of reports on these things, and there are actual indictments that have been issued. And there is a guy who was arrested in Belgium at the behest of the U.S. government, and he supposedly was trying to get technology. So there's a lot of this stuff going on, and it's across the economy. Big issues. We didn't have a chance, if you have time to look at that presentation, to talk about territorial issues. South China Sea. Now these are Chinese tourists visiting Vietnam. They think. They're at the airport, but what are they wearing? Well, yeah, they've got their group uniform, but their group uniform happens to be a t-shirt with a map showing Chinese claims in the South China Sea. And those Chinese claims include areas and islands that the Vietnamese claim. So pretty much this is like showing up in Beijing airport with a Free Tibet t-shirt. Okay? Did they get to leave the airport wearing these t-shirts? No. No. They did get in. They did get to go, and I don't know if they popped them back on as soon as they cleared immigration, but in any case, these are kind of fighting terms, right? But most Chinese think this ought to be. Say, this has been our territory since time began. You know this because our porcelain is at the bottom of the sea there. Okay, we shipped it back and forth and stuff like this. We also didn't get to talk about Hong Kong, where things are continuing to heat up. These are posters calling people to join demonstrations. Okay? Giant demonstrations. Okay? Arguments about how many people, who knows, but a lot of people. Perhaps at their height on July 1st, maybe something like better than, not quite a third of the entire population in the streets. That might be exaggerated, but a lot of people, unprecedented. With signs, making claims, standing off against police, and broke into government offices and defaced the symbols of both the People's Republic itself and the Special Administrative Region. As a consequence, Carrie Lam, who, as it happens, I met last week, the day after she gave this speech about the bill being dead, stopped the protests. The bill is dead. But it's not actually in her hands right at this moment. So protests continue. And then just last week, protesters had a demonstration. They were on their way home, and thugs attacked them. Some people have been arrested and are said to have been among the group beating these protesters. It continues. Also, last week, we have this BBC report about the discovery of explosives. And a person who purportedly is associated with the protesters was among the folks. And I got into an animated discussion with somebody yesterday, last night. Why aren't these people called terrorists? They have bombs. Why? If your students asked you that, why? Should they be called terrorists? Should they be called separatists? What are they? Revolutionaries. What? It's not simple. First of all, it's 2 million people. They're probably not one thing, right? They're unhappy, they're disgruntled. Some may want separation from China. And there may be some who are willing to use violence to do it. We don't know, it's important to remember, that using violence doesn't necessarily mean you are a terrorist. A terrorist uses violence to inspire fear more generally. Some others use violence in a very targeted way against a government. Right? Labels matter. When you talk about what happened in Beijing in 1989, what terms do you use? Labels matter. And we're a prisoner. So the Chinese government in Beijing had some areas that they wanted to clear out. And they used this term, a rather offensive term for these migrants. And they recognized that that was politically incorrect, and they changed the term. But there was pushback. And this is a giant issue. I mentioned the Exclusion Act. In our past, in the American past, we have issues, right? Today, we mentioned yesterday about internment camps, detention centers in Xinjiang. And I mentioned Kashgar in this area. Part of China's development is to what? To integrate poorer areas into the more vibrant whole. To stabilize these regions and to tie them as part of the Belt and Road Initiative to this global economy. And so there's a lot of investment. A couple of the 1990 board members actually visited the region and saw some of this amazing development in terms of electricity transmission, road building, all kinds of stuff. I went there in 1985. It was not like that. Things are changing. It was more like this, the picture up here, but then you can see just in a short time these changes. But these are re-education camps. They may be learning job skills, there may be a vocation element, but if it's mainly a vocational program, you don't arrest people who are 60. So there's contradictions in the story. We also didn't talk about really Taiwan, which is having an election. Tsai Ing-wen was in the United States last week, New York and Denver, and other places. In Taipei, she visited the Facebook place. She's big on Facebook. Line is probably more popular than Facebook, but anyway. This guy is her opponent, her main declared opponent at this point. Han Guoyu. He's been mayor of Kaohsiung for a while. just 7 months. But he has attracted a giant following. Now, they had a primary election. No, they didn't. They had a poll. So the two parties used opinion polling to choose their respective candidates. And in his case, they only used landlines. Landlines. For some of you, I have to explain what a landline is. It's a phone connected by wire to a pole, okay? Yeah, it's not where a lot of people are. And so it's skewed anyway, but he beat out, not this guy. This guy is an unknown. He promised today that he's going to declare either by September that he'll run or not. No one quite knows. He's a physician by training and the mayor of Taipei. You recognize one of these people, okay? This is in Wisconsin, where they both pretended to do some work with gold shovels, right? And so no one quite knows how rich Trump is, but everybody does know this guy's fantastically rich, Taiwan's richest man, the Foxconn founder. And he ran against Han Kuo-yu for the nomination of the Kuomintang, the Nationalist Party. He lost. He's rich enough, we don't know if he's angry enough, to run as an independent. So stay tuned. That vote is in January. But just to suggest how different Taiwan is from the mainland, look at this. Whose flags are those? Those are the PRC flags. But where is this? In Taipei, the capital of Taiwan. And you have posters showing Sun Yat-sen, really the only person who's a hero on both sides of the straits, and Xi Jinping. Okay, our next speaker has arrived, so I need to move forward. I'll be back in San Francisco next week. You're welcome to join. This information's available. Ruby's got it. Just very quickly, what's this? I told you it was a test. Meat? What? Mint. Actually, rencheng ginseng. Ginseng. This is wild. And yesterday, Mark Henderson made reference to U.S. China trade going back a couple centuries. This is the Empress of China, the ship that made this long journey. And the Chinese, Americans don't remember it, but the Chinese do. They issued a coin to commemorate it. And that ship carried 60,000 pounds of ginseng. And it returned with Nanking trousers. It's okay, I don't know what they are either. This is what they are. It's a kind of fabric produced in China, okay? And 800 chests of tea plus porcelain. So you can see what was bought and sold and all of this trade. And then we started ordering up this kind of porcelain product. And one of our speakers today is an expert on the area which produced a lot of that stuff. Well, we still produce ginseng. And here we've got a company that's only accepting orders from the United States. Why? It's too complicated to send it to China now. But the Wisconsin Ginseng Board, who knew? Who knew? Is growing ginseng with love. And they produce 10% of the world's supply. Okay. I need somebody to tap the video. Stephanie, if you would. Oh, back. Just on the video, the black box there.
Thank you, Mike. And you know, Mike, it is true
Don't worry,
that
this is
as
short.
I walked through the halls, we saw so many great companies. But the gentleman who was in charge of Omaha beef, they do beef, he hugged me. He wanted to kiss me so badly because he said, our business is a whole different business now because you got China approved. The other administrations couldn't even come close. And I told him, you know how long it took? One sentence. I said, President Xi, we'd love to sell beef back in China again. He said, you can do that. That was the end of that, right? Sonny, the great Sonny Perdue. So it's been really a pleasure.
We can stop.
We want to build, create, and grow more products in our country using American.
The point here is, this is July 2 years ago, and of course the trade situation's gotten a whole lot worse. Okay? Mark highlighted these key connections. He demonstrated how you can use the mapping technology to look at all kinds of things. How China is changing physically, right? Less land, all these kinds of things. So we can look at those things. Now, I thought that this presentation on addressing a migrant health issue was fantastic. And my takeaways consisted of the revolutionary idea that policymakers, before they issue policies, should do what? Listen, ask, talk to these folks who are going to be affected. You might come up with a different policy and that policy might be more effective. That's the key. And that process continues. You have this feedback loop. And they emphasized the process. They emphasized the engagement. And that is why they are more effective in this limited area than other programs much better funded, okay, which have a top-down approach. And they demonstrated this wellness guide and things like that. I have to wrap up, but let me just highlight this millennial population. Someday we have to just talk about millennials. Some of you are millennials. You should tell me about millennials, right? But it's a big issue. Could we play this video very... Yeah, all the Chinese know.
我最近越来越觉得女人真是不好做。比如说，如果女人爱打扮，就会被人说捯饬的那么好看，想去勾引谁呀？可是如果女人不爱打扮，又要被人说出门也不知道打扮打扮，你还是个女的吗？你听好，我高兴了就打扮，我不高兴我就不打扮，你管得着吗？滚！还有，女人如果说话嗲一点就要被人骂狐狸精，可是如果说话冷一点也要被人骂装什么。
So, could you teach Chinese with this? Not a chance. Not a chance. First of all, she speaks quickly, and then through machine, they make it even quicker, right? But she has a giant following, articulating all sorts of issues. And she's at the older edge of that millennial divide, and is a very talented actress. She's trained as an actress and commentator. Huawei system. I'm going to not show you this because we need to move on. But the Huawei system, the household registration system, came up a couple times yesterday because it's an internal regulatory means. And it has less control today than it once did in the lives of Chinese. But it's central and it's discriminatory. It's tied to who your mother was. There was a system in this country which had the same formula. What did we call that? Slavery. This is not slavery. I'm not comparing it to slavery, but I'm suggesting it's a what? Not an earned status, but an ascribed status. We could talk about that. Frank Dictator talked about it. China wants to get back to economic prevalence, right? Economic success. It has achieved so much. Because this is the past. So I talked yesterday about rejuvenation. That's where they want to go. This movie is available on the web. It's not a great movie, but it's interesting. This American kid is trying to teach his Chinese grandfather about Spider-Man. Meanwhile, the Chinese grandfather is a specialist in shadow puppets, and he creates a Spider-Man shadow puppet. Of course, they disagree. The kid runs away, is rediscovered. They love each other. And it's not it's kind of fake America because they have some Europeans representing the United States in it. Stories we tell, skills we develop, the future we shape. Today we're talking about healthcare. We're looking at technology, business exchange, and art. I think the thing that we missed in yesterday's discussion with Frank, he gave you the snapshot Chinese government view of Chinese history, and he gave you his view. They don't coincide very much. I would suggest to you that the truth lies somewhere in between. And one of the reasons why Frank's picture is a bit, in my opinion, distorted is because he plays up some things and not others.